We're back out here once again, and today I'm going to show you some of my favorite tips and tricks for targeting and catching the biggest bass in your fishery. Stick around, you don't want to miss this one. Got him! I got him! That's a good one. That's a nice one. That is a nice one. That is a tank. That is a tank. And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to lowbrow fishing, and it's a fact of bass fishing. Every single time we head out to the water, we want to catch the biggest fish we can. We'd like to catch one of those double-digit bass, one of those 10-pound plus bass. Now, a lot of times that's going to be unrealistic, especially given the fishery that we have. Big bass is relative, right? But that's not a cop-out. I have a few tips and a few tricks that help me land those better bass. And I'm fortunate that I feel like I'm getting bigger bass more than most anglers, especially in my area. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this because I view this in a particular way. There is a certain point of view that I put my mindset in whenever I'm targeting those bigger bass. And with just a couple of simple and easy to do tricks, you can change from catching dink after dink after dink to targeting those bigger bass and catching more and more quality bass. And it's like anything else, right? The more you do it, the better you get at it. So this year especially, I have been really fortunate to catch some of those really nice bass. Again, when we head out to the water, what's the first thing we want to do? Well, the first thing we want to do is establish a pattern. We want to find out what are those bass biting. But you have to think in terms of big fish versus small fish. It's almost like those bigger bass are a completely different species because you have the bass behavior for the little bass and then you have the bass behavior from the bigger bass. And sure, there's some amount of overlap, but for the most part, they are wide apart when it comes to how to approach them and how to catch them. Dinks, they're easy to catch. You can catch dinks almost by accident. And if you let that lull you into a sense of security that you've found those bass, it can really hamper your day, you know. And we get into a habit of that, right? I'll get out on the water and I will have to wade through dink after dink after dink after dink. And it seems like that's all I'm catching. But believe it or not, I'm still going through that process. I'm going through a process of elimination where I know that if I'm catching dinks, I'm not going to be catching toads. Very rarely do they hang around each other. Bass usually congregate in groups that are similar size, similar age. It's just how they work. And if you're catching a bunch of little fish, move. That's what I do. If I'm catching a dink and then I catch another dink, I say, okay, this area is not going to be producing nicer fish, and I move along. A lot of times I will try to reproduce the same pattern. If I'm catching dinks on a little crankbait, you know, if I'm catching dinks on a worm or a wacky rig or whatever, I will try to reproduce that in a different area and to see if I can get a little bit bigger bite. If I'm still catching dinks, well, again, I'm telling myself, this is not the best place to be. This is a poor spot for finding those bigger bass. And if you think about it, well, community holes on any fishery, they are generally not the biggest producers of nice bass. Sure, you can catch some quality fish out of them. You can catch a good number of fish out of them. That's why they're community holes. But I try to go to those out-of-the-way places. It's something that my little bass raider, my little plastic boat, that's something that it really lets me do very well. I can go to the places that other anglers can't get to. And that's where those big girls congregate. They're going to congregate in those out-of-the-way places. They're going to find themselves those places where they can just separate from everything else, because those big bass got to be big bass for a reason. And that reason being is they're smart, they're wise, they've seen it all, and they're not going to expend a lot of energy chasing bait. If they can't get to it easily, if they can't get the meal that they want easily, well, they're not going to waste their time with it. So if you think about it, how many times have you caught a big bass off of a lone stump somewhere, or a grass pile somewhere, or you threw out and there was a piece of flooded brush and it was just an isolated incident, but it happened to have a really nice bass under it? Sometimes that can be the absolute best triggering spot. Stay away from the community holes. That's key one. Understand that those bass, the big ones and the small ones, are generally not going to congregate together. Once you establish those things and you start locating those bigger bass spots, well, then you can really start to catch those bigger quality fish. So first things first, targeting where those better quality fish are. They're not going to be community holes, and if you're catching dink after dink, again, time to move on. You may still be able to catch bass with that pattern. You may be able to catch nice bass with that pattern. But again, separate yourself from the dinks. I'm looking for the really, really isolated spots. And generally, these areas are very small in size, right? A 10-foot circle around a stump, a single laydown that's got some shade over the top of it, right along the flooded brush. You see there's a shade line from just a single clump of trees or bushes. Often those little holes are going to be your honeyed holes. An old dock sitting at the back of a nondescript creek arm. Nothing special about it, just one dock sitting way in the back, that nobody ever fishes. Those types of things are going to be the honey holes that you're looking for. So what am I doing to target those bass? What baits am I using? Well, you get guys who go out there on the lake and they're using these things. This is a great big glide bait. This is a 6th Sense glide bait, and this is in a threadfin shad pattern. Although, quite honestly, the big lake or any of the other lakes around here do not have shad nearly this big. But it's a great way to entice those really big bass, right? But it takes a special way to fish it. When you're putting on a glide bait and you're out there fishing, it's a mentality. You're going to be out there, and generally you're going to be fishing offshore a little bit. You're going to be looking for those channel swings, you're going to be looking for those ledges, you're going to be looking for those current seams and vegetation edges where you can get those bass to come up out of that cover. But you don't need one of these, right? This is not the only lure you need for targeting those big bass, although it is a lot of fun. But that's one of those things you tie on a glide bait, you get there out in the water, and you spend all week fishing all day for maybe 3 or 4 really giant bites. And again, it can be an effective way to fish. It can be an effective way to catch giant fish. Another thing you'll hear people say is use really big baits, right? Again, like that glide bait, but again, we can still use something like this Zoom Magnum Old Monster or the tried and true Man's Jelly Worm. Tie these on a 3/4 ounce wobblehead jig or what have you, and then drag them on the bottom during the summertime to get those big bites. We hear everybody talk about it. Great big worm equals great big bites. But I'm going to let you know a little secret. Some of the biggest fish I've ever caught, some of the 7, 8, 9-pound bass that I have caught have been on some of the tiniest little baits. So the bass may not actually need a big bait to catch a big bass. Most of the big bass that I've caught have been on things like, well, a smaller jerkbait, right? This little KVD 200, this is a smaller pared down size of a jerkbait. And right now we've talked about how something like that can be really super effective. A lot of those bass, especially the dinks, are going to be chasing those bait balls. And we've talked about how those busting bass and those bait balls can be, well, chasing them all day can be chasing your tail, can be nothing but frustration. If you do catch bass, a lot of times that's where the dinks are going to be, because they are going to be the more active fish. They're the ones that are going to be out running about, right? They're going to be the ones that are going after those minnow balls. And there's nothing wrong with that. They need to eat up too. But those bigger bass rarely chase. Those bigger bass are going to be holed up somewhere waiting for that bigger meal, that better meal to come to them. And if all they have to do is just reach out and inhale it, that's what they're going to do. So something like this smaller jerkbait, something like this smaller 200 size jerkbait can be just exactly what you need. You don't have to go super huge with a glide bait. They're a lot of fun to fish, and they're a lot of fun when you catch those great big bass, but some of the biggest fish I've ever caught have just been on a regular lipless crank. This right here, this is a 6th Sense Quake 70. And, well, on some lakes, this is exactly what I use to entice those larger bass. Again, first thing I'm doing is I'm looking for that out of the way place. I'm looking for maybe that harder to get to place where those bass are going to be away from the pressure, they're going to be away from all that traffic, and just a regular old lipless crankbait. It doesn't have to be one of these, you know. I've caught them on a Guggen crankbait. I've caught them on a Cotton Cordell. I've caught them on an old Bill Lewis rattle trap, a Strike King Red Eye Shad, what have you, whatever your favorite brand is. Now, again, this is the color that I like to use. This is that threadfin shad pattern, and it seems to work more during the summer with both little fish and bigger fish because they're chasing this. So I just tend to gravitate toward that as a starting point. If I can get something a little bit better, maybe go to a gold color, maybe go to a chartreuse, maybe go to something that's bright neon, who knows, I will dial it in after I feel like I've located those better bass. But it doesn't have to be giant bait. You can catch them on smaller baits. You can catch them on little Ned rigs. You can catch them on wacky worms, whatever you have to target them with. It all boils down to being in the right place at the right time. But that is not luck. You can control being in the right place at the right time. It just takes a little bit of getting out on the water on your fishery and deciphering a few things. You know, stay away from the dinks, stay away from the community holes, look for those isolated pockets. If you can find places that nobody else is fishing, and this goes for bank anglers too. I've seen some places all around the big lake that I've said to myself, and I've said to Mrs. Lowbrow, if you're fishing from the bank, that would be a choice spot right there. You could absolutely tear them up. And a lot of those places, boats can't get to. The water is just too shallow. There's too much vegetation. Sometimes if you're fishing a creek or a creek arm, there's logs and trees in the way. A boat can't get past that. So you have definite advantages that you can use to help you find those bigger fish. So there you have it. With a few simple changes, mostly in your mindset, you can go from catching dink after dink to being absolutely amazed at how many of those better quality and big bass that you've caught by the end of the year. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.